We'd like to welcome you all to our Faith Baptist Church Wednesday night prayer room meeting for the second one in the month of August. And as we get started, tomorrow is a special day in my family's life because it's my daughter Michelle's birthday. I just do. So she'll be 43 years old tomorrow. And so she's not here tonight, but they watch online. So any of you that would like to come and join me up here, and as we sing happy birthday to Michelle, she'll be able to see the people that are wishing her a happy birthday, and it will bless her. So
Doug, you want to just zoom out on that camera so she can...
So we're getting a crowd up here, Michelle. So everybody is going to sing happy birthday. Oh, all right.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is the Faith Baptist Church Happy Birthday Choir. All right, we're going to do it in the key of G. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Michelle. Happy birthday to you. Woo! Thank you, everyone. Thank you. All right, now they all got to go down. While everybody's sitting down, we'll start this song. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. So tonight, Andy and Blake are going to be sharing from the book of Ruth. And as I've read the book of Ruth this week, two words just jump out over and over and over again. One is the word bless or blessed, and the other is the word redeemed or redeem or redeemer. And so the next two songs we're going to sing aren't about Ruth, but they're all about being blessed and being redeemed. So join me as we sing this. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. All praise to him who reigns above in majesty supreme, who gave his Son for man to die, that he might man redeem. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. His name above all names shall stand, exalted more and more, at God the Father's own right hand, where angel hosts adore. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Redeemer, Savior, friend of man, once ruined by the fall, thou hast devised salvation's plan, for thou hast died for all. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name, blessed be the name, blessed be the name of the Lord. Good singing, everybody. Redeemed, how I love to proclaim, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through his infinite mercy, his child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, his child and forever I am. Redeemed and so happy in Jesus, no language my rapture can tell. I know that the light of his presence with me doth continually dwell. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. I think of my blessed Redeemer, I think of him all the day long. I sing for I cannot be silent, his love is the theme of my song. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, his child and forever I am. I know I shall see in his beauty the King in whose law I delight, who lovingly guardeth my footsteps and giveth me songs in the night. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by
Good evening. I'm here to give an update on David and Evelyn Dye, our missionaries that are in Shelby, Tennessee with Life Worth Living Ministries. They just celebrated yesterday, I believe, their 42nd wedding anniversary. And they had posted this picture of themselves back in the day when they got married. And I still remember them looking that way because we were friends in college. So we have a lot of memories that were good memories. David also updates us that he is in the latter phase of his recovery from his knee replacement. He's doing very well. He has finished his therapy, and he says his knee feels much better. He doesn't have any pain, and he's graduated from his cane. So if we could go to the next slide, you can kind of see he does have the cane in this picture. I think this was Old-Fashioned Sunday. I kind of chuckled when I saw this picture because I thought, in Virginia, this isn't Old-Fashioned Sunday. This is how... Sunday. Yeah, this is just how our... I know my husband wears the bibs, so he loves the bibs. But anyway, this is just some pictures they had shared with us in this letter. He titled his update he called it Holding Up Heavy Arms. And he used the verse from Samuel about David. When David was greatly distressed, it says, David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And he just reminded us how we all have experienced in our Christian life some time where we've been discouraged, and how that faith, our faith can weaken during that time, and our spirits can get discouraged. And just how important it is for us to be those two men like the example with Moses. I'm getting ahead of myself, where he talks about Moses when he was holding up his arms and he became weary. If you remember in Exodus when the battle between the Israelites and the Amalekites was going on, and he'd have to hold his hands up. And as long as he held his hands up, they were winning. But when he would put them down and he would get weary, they would be losing. But Aaron and Hur came alongside him, and they held his arms up. And I think in this phase in their ministry, because of the physical things they've been experiencing, their ministry has kind of changed. They've kind of always done this, but right now, because they're not able to take care of the widows with being a 24/7 job, they've hosted other folks in the home. And if we could see another slide, one of the things they've done is they've had a ladies' prayer group that meets there twice a month. And then the next slide. These were just some ladies from the Arts Academy that stayed there at the home with them. And then the next slide is some of the other, just pictures of them. They've had people there that have been discouraged, they've dealt with stressed, they've got on here, we've dealt with stressed pastors and missionary wives, couples facing serious issues, and just how broken they have been over what they have seen and that's going on in the world today. But they close in their prayer letter asking, they said, again, Faith Baptist Church, thank you for being our prayer warriors and for financially sustaining us in the faith. I encourage you all to be Aaron and Hur by prayers and acts of encouragement. Hold up, fortify the arms of your pastor and his family, your church leadership, and the household of faith. God bless you, David and Evelyn Dye.
All right. Well, that was a very nice update. Thank you, Stara, for letting us know what's going on in their lives. A few things to make announcement of out of the prayer and praise. Obviously not this Wednesday and next Wednesday, but the last Wednesday of the month, which is actually only 2 weeks away, is our prayer room dinner and a movie. And if you saw the news, Maho Williams is actually going to be making dinner for us. She's going to be preparing a traditional Colombian soup, And so if you would like to, continue our adventures around the world through the meals that we've been having on Wednesday nights, you're getting an authentic taste of Columbia on the 30th of August. And the sign-up sheet is, as always, out front. I just want to just make mention on the turnout that we had at the worship in the park. We had quite a few visitors out there, and I understand it's a little difficult for some of our regular members to get out there in the grass, and so we missed you, and we just welcomed those visitors. We had at least 2 people who indicated that they had asked to receive salvation out there. I'm sure there were more who I didn't see, but if you were sitting next to somebody or you know of somebody, make sure you keep in contact with them and encourage them and help disciple them, that they might begin their walk with the Lord in a manner that pursues discipleship. We have Teresa Cash let me know that she has been feeling better about her broken hip, and hopefully the Lord continues to provide her healing with that. I want to make mention of Larry Fix's upcoming bladder surgery, and just keep all those folks on the prayer list that are in the prayer list lifted up. 2 last quick announcements. Sunday, August 20th, that is coming up here shortly. That will be our promotion Sunday day, so we're just going to take a minute out of our normal worship time, and we're going to lift up all those students who are going back to school before the Lord in prayer, that He might give them grace and strength and a good school year, and also for the teachers who actually did start, I guess, Tuesday, that they might be able to be encouraged in the Lord throughout the time of teaching them, as well as our Impact Teens will resume meeting that Sunday night at 6 p.m. And that's going to be here at the building, back in the modular.
Yep.
All right, so if you're watching, you got parents of teenagers, Sunday, August 20th. So would you join me in prayer? Lord, I thank you for the visitors that we've had, the folks that have been attending regularly in the past month or 2, Lord, that you would encourage them to consider membership here, Lord, and allow us to come alongside of them to be their Christian family and to help them live lives, as you've said, as being obedient to all that you've commanded. And Father, I ask you to be with those new believers and allow them to be engaged with Christian believer friends who will help them disciple them and grow them in the early stages of their walk following after you, Lord. And Father, I ask for your hand of healing on all those with upcoming surgeries, those who are recovering from surgery, and for those who have not been here in a while, Lord, that your Spirit would remind them that they are to gather together in person with the brothers and sisters, Lord, that you would encourage them to receive that fellowship and to receive that rebuke with a heart of repentance, not of anger. And Lord, I ask all these things in Jesus' precious name. Well, I was mentioning to Blake about how much there is that we could go over in the book of Ruth. And he told me I couldn't spend 3 months just going through the book of Ruth, even though there is that much in it. So I thought, well, how can we at least skim the surface and get an understanding of the depth of study that is available before we turn our attention to just one aspect of the book of Ruth, so that you at least get a taste of it. And you may be familiar with the Bible Project. They have usually very, very good videos. There's one point where he says something about being surprised or finding out at the last minute about the near kinsman redeemer, which doesn't seem to match with what Scripture said. But other than that, would you entertain us by your attention in the Bible Project video about the book of Ruth? And could we just get the lights done?
The Book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are three main characters in the book: Naomi the widow, Ruth the Moabite, and Boaz the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line: "In the days when the judges ruled." And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they move on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi, and she says, "Wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God." And so the two of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. He prays for her that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, and Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe the woman of Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events. In chapter 4, it all comes together. It turns out, at the last minute, Boaz discovers there is a family member who's closer to Naomi than he is, and he's actually eligible before him to redeem the family. But at the last second, this family member finds out that he's going to have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, and so he declines. But Boaz, remember, he knows Ruth's true character, and so he acquires the family property of Naomi, and he marries Ruth. And so just at the beginning, how Ruth was loyal to Naomi's family, so now Boaz is loyal to Naomi's family as well. The story concludes with a reversal of all of the tragedies from chapter 1. So the death of the husband and the sons is reversed as Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to Naomi. And this symmetry between the opening and the closing, it's even more remarkable. So remember, the opening tragedy was followed by a great act of loyalty on the part of Ruth. And that is now matched by Boaz's act of loyalty that leads to the family's final restoration. And this symmetry, it highlights the design of the internal chapters as well. So each of the chapters begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan for their future, and that's followed by a providential meeting between Ruth and Boaz, and each chapter concludes with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at what's taken place. This story is beautifully designed, and that design actually connects with a really interesting feature of the story, and that's how little God is mentioned. Right, the characters talk about God a few times, but the narrator actually never once mentions God doing anything directly in the story, and that's its brilliance. Because God's providence is at work behind every scene of this story, weaving together the circumstances and choices of all these characters. So Naomi, her tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but actually the whole story is about God's mission to restore her and her family. And he's doing so through Ruth, through her boldness and loyalty, which brings healing to Naomi's life, but not without Boaz, who's a no-nonsense farmer who's full of generosity and loyalty. And so God uses his integrity combined with Ruth's boldness to save Naomi and her family. And so this story brilliantly explores the interplay of God's purposes and will with human decision and will. God weaves together the faithful obedience of his people to bring about his redemptive purposes in the world. And that leads to the real end of the story. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy, showing how Boaz and Ruth's son, Oved, was the grandfather of King David, from whom came the lineage of the Messiah. And so all of a sudden, these seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. And that's what the book of Ruth is all about.
Isn't that a good video? So I want to now kind of focus on just the character of Ruth, but I don't want to take away from the overview theme just yet. I want us to consider the situation that Ruth found herself in. The book of Judges ends by noting that in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that theme, in those days there was no king, is this implicit message that this situation, the restoration, the rightful behavior of the nation Israel is not going to work until they have a king. And so it isn't by accident that the person who compiled the order of books in the Old Testament put the story of how did we get the genealogy of the king David of Israel, which is Ruth. And so this is the opening. In those days when the judges ruled, and I think this is probably Judges chapter 3 time frame going into chapter 4, the nation Israel was being put under judgment because of their disobedience from God. And there was a famine in the land. And the man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn. That means just he really only meant to spend, like a Motel 6 overnight. But what always happens when we sin and receive the consequence of sin and we try to run away from that, what's meant to be a sojourn ends up being a microtel, month stay and then year stay. So this is what's happening. And it's interesting that he goes into the country of Moab, and he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, God my king, and the name of his wife Naomi, which they mentioned was sweetness, and the name of his 2 sons were Machlon, which means sick or sickly, and Chilion, which means feeble or frail. Like, what wonderful names to give to your kids. They're sick and sicker, right? So no surprise. And it says they were Ephrathites. Bethlehem of Ephrathah, that's the one where Jesus was born. So if you're from there, you're an Ephrathite in Judah. They went into the country of Moab, and remained there. So we need to remember, first of all, where does Moab come from? Moab comes from the events in Genesis where Lot's two daughters, after Sodom and Gomorrah, and their mother turned into a pillar of salt. They believed that the whole world was going to end and that it was their responsibility to continue the human race. So they got dad drunk and had children with dad. Not a bedtime story for little kids, but biblically it happened. The oldest one born was the patriarch of the Moabites. The Moabites were ancestrally.
Sounds right.
Okay. Y'all know what I mean by that? They were the ancestral enemies of Israel. When they came out of slavery in Egypt, they were kind of hanging around and picking off the weak ones from behind. They called Balaam to come and try to curse Israel, right? And so the first time the king tries to get Balaam to come and curse Israel, he doesn't go. And then the king sends another messenger, and the angel of the Lord visits him and says, "Go, but say only what I will say." And so for 3 times he blesses them, and the king of the Moabites gets more and more angry, and Balaam's like, "What can I do? I can only say what God tells me to say." He says, "If you want to mess them up, send in your pretty women and to intermarry with them, and they will lead them astray to follow after false gods." It's like, I can't curse them, but you can. And that's exactly what they do. And that's exactly what we see happen in Numbers 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, is that the nation Israel turns away from God and begins to marry them. And so when the law was given, it was expressly stated that no one born of a forbidden union, that means you were not allowed to marry them, may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of his descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord. No Ammonite or Moabite, those are the 2 kids, remember, may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse you. And so that's what we see, Baal worship in Peor. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. Remember, we saw just last week, that's where the spies were sent in. That was from the same area. And so while they're spying out this land and getting the intel and meeting Rahab, the nation Israel is intermarrying with the daughters of Moab. Rahab, Moab. So these invited the people to the sacrifice of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. But now we turn to Ruth, back to Ruth. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now remember, the 2 sons are Israelites. They took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both of their husbands, Machlon, sick and feeble, died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So we would think, looking at this circumstance, looking at this situation, the law of God, the explicit prohibition against marrying Moabite women and against allowing them into the nation Israel, and especially worshiping, that there's no way if Ruth goes back that she ought to be accepted by the people. They shouldn't have been married in the first place, right? But what do we actually see Scripture indicate? It says, going all the way to the end, so Boaz took Ruth, the second Israelite husband this Moabite woman now has had. Why? Because her husband died. Her mom, who had an inheritance but couldn't be married and couldn't evidently have more children. And so her adopted child, her child-in-law, is now allowed to be in communion with and be fully on par with any Jewish person, because she is the heiress, the woman who is the great-grandmother of David, who is the ancestral patriarch of Jesus himself. And this is what this story says. And so what should we understand about this? What should we learn about this? Whoa, I am... The circumstances of where you came from or whatever had happened to you in the past are not greater than the power of being in Jesus Christ, being adopted by him as your Savior. They're not an obstacle to him. If you grew up in a bad home or had difficult circumstances happen to you as a child, it isn't as if, or even as an adult, if you had been living away from the grace of God. Ruth should not have been married to an Israelite in the first place. It was expressly forbidden. But Boaz redeemed Naomi's family because Ruth was brought in through that marriage. I mean, this is like a picture of the Gentiles being the keepers of the gospel message, and at some point in time, Israel will be grafted back in. There's all kinds of prophetic interplay on this. But the important part is what Ruth didn't do was Ruth didn't say, well, I'm not worthy, so I'm not going to go. She didn't say, I'm not allowed, so I won't go. Ruth is repictured in the New Testament, the story of the persistent widow who, keeps going back to the judge, and in spite of being sent away, he calls her a dog. She keeps coming back because God is not, limited by the circumstances in our life. That is not an obstacle to him. His purposes to use our life are greater than the circumstances in our life. I can think of, even in my own personal background, I grew up in a Roman Catholic, works-oriented. Somebody is about to fall down. And that was my heart language. That was what I, believed absolutely. And I didn't think a person could be saved outside of the Roman Catholic Church. Like if you're not in the Roman Catholic system, getting your, communion, confession, confirmation, marriage, and doing penance, that, too bad for you. It doesn't matter how much you love God. You can't. And here I am, I'm a pastor at a Baptist church. Like, what a radically different, seeing people get saved out at worship in the park and at vacation Bible school, and, coming to hear the story of the Lord. The background of where I came from was not an obstacle to God to use me, and I'm sure you have similar stories and events.
Yeah, and to go along with that, especially when I was called into ministry, specifically in student ministry. I was wrestling with where to go to college, and if some of you don't know this already, I'm a pretty shy guy. But I've gotten a lot better since. If you knew me back when I was getting ready to consider different colleges, I was pretty shy. I pretty much I had my friends and tried to put myself out there, but it wasn't always easy to do. And so when I was looking and I felt God was calling me to Liberty, I prayed about it, and it was definitely something that was a circumstance for me, being shy, going to a place that was like 12 to 14,000 other people that would be there with me, and to kind of get lost in the crowd and feel like, how in the world, God, are you going to use me at such a big place, and to help me gain the knowledge that I need to do what you've called me to do. But he did, and it actually, he used it as a second home for me, and it didn't feel like a big place. And then through there, I found a church family that I served with for 3 years, and even just through that of serving in a bigger church, and back in Buena Vista, where I grew up, I was a part of a smaller church. So another reason for being shy is I didn't have to meet and talk with a lot of people. But at this church that I served at for 3 years, it was 1,000, 2,000 people at the church, and so I learned to put myself out there, and it's just through the circumstance of being shy and not putting myself out there as much. God didn't see that as an obstacle for that or for my calling, but he used it for the purpose for my life to bring him honor and glory.
Yeah, absolutely. So a second thing to recognize about Ruth in particular was the way she responded to the situation. Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For wherever you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So this is the point where she recognizes somehow, we're not told in Scripture, but who God is, that God is faithful, that he will be a blessing and respond to faithfulness. We can imagine she must have heard those things from her father and mother-in-law. But notice in chapter 2, the status of her faith, the position of her faith, is spoken of by Boaz as being already firmly planted, right? Already he has seen that she understands what it means to rest in her faith on the Lord. He exclaims, which is why there's an exclamation point at the end, "The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel." And notice the past tense, "under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz, by seeing her actions, her faithful actions, her obedience and following and boldness following after the Lord, understands that she has faith in God. And that's kind of the second thing I want us to learn from Ruth as we consider her life and the story and the circumstances, is that not only when God purposes to use your life are the circumstances not an obstacle to him, but he's actually going to use our obedient faithfulness as the instrument that he's going to use to work out his purposes, right? He's going to give us the honor of letting our obedient faithfulness be the very thing that he uses to bring about his purposes. I know for myself, again, going back to being saved, I had friends that were speaking into my life from a Baptist background, a Pentecostal background, a Episcopalian background, and a new kid from Florida that grew up in a charismatic sort of environment. And the one thing they all had in common that I didn't was they all understood the gospel. Right? They had different views about baptism and church structure and spiritual gifts, but they all knew that the person is saved by grace through faith. And they were not shy about standing up to my false beliefs. And we would speak and study for hours together, into the night. We would gather together, and it was incredible for me to look back on that and think who would have taken the time to spend years with an obstinate, bratty Roman Catholic kid to speak truth into their life. And I have no doubt that, I know at least one of them has already gone home to be with the Lord, that he has, received a great reward for that. And it was their obedient faithfulness to share their faith that resulted in my coming to faith in the first place. But it wasn't their work that did it. It was the fact that they were participating, doing what God told them to do, and being faithful and obedient.
Yeah, and so going back to I've thought about this many of times. If I wasn't obeying and being faithful to God and continuing to follow his plan as far as going to college where I did, as well as serving at the church that I did, just the impact that many people, just like Andy said about people that poured into his life, that impact that they had of pouring into my life, I would have missed out on, and the impact that I was lucky enough, the students that God blessed me with, that I got to minister to, the impact I couldn't have made there for God, and just learning what discipleship is and learning about just the different intimate relationships I was able to have. If I didn't have that, then if I didn't faithfully obey, then just like Andy mentioned, I would have, you miss out on the reward. You lose all of that if you're not faithfully obeying. So I've just considered in my life many of times of the importance of obeying God and being faithful in what you'll, the
great.
reward that'll come from it.
So the last related point on this one kind of thread that we're looking at, although there are many, many more in the book of Ruth, this scene is taking place at the threshing floor. Ruth is at the feet of Boaz. He says, "And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I." So we see now the introduction of the contrasting character, right? We're going to see Boaz's faithfulness and this other unnamed person's unfaithfulness. And Ruth here has got to be thinking, well, I know who Boaz is, but I don't even know who this other guy is, right? Boaz is obviously much older than she is. She's still willing to marry him and have children with him to restore Naomi's family name. But now there's this introduction of this other person who she doesn't know. And that probably sounds weird to your, American ears that you would choose to marry somebody because you want to perpetuate your family land, possessions, and name. And even if that person is, a generation older than you, because you probably grew up on Disney that you marry people for love and, the butterflies in your heart or whatever, and the stars in your eye, and, Mickey Mouse and all that garbage. But this is now presented to her. Who is this other person? So Boaz goes to him. He goes to this other person who we don't know the name of, and he says, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative. God is my king, Elimelech. So the introduction to this guy is, hey, you can be a part of this law of levirate marriage, of restoring our relatives' family's heritage. Sounds like great, right? And so Boaz, so I thought I'd tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And so now all this guy knows about the situation is he gets to buy the land and redeem, which goes with marrying somebody, right? He knows that, but in his mind, he doesn't realize the person he's to marry is a Moabitess, somebody he should not be married to by the letter of the law. He doesn't understand the redemption that has occurred. And so he says, oh, sure, I'll marry any Jewish girl you want to redeem that land, right? Hopefully she looks nice and cooks good, irons out my toga well or whatever. So Boaz says, great. The day you buy the field from the land of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, and he's making a point, the Moabitess, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead and its inheritance. And this guy says, I will obey God. No, he says, I cannot redeem it for myself because my own inheritance would be at risk. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So this guy, backs out when he finds out he's got to marry the Moabitess. And so also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife. Again, that's a sentence that probably sounds weird in your American ears, that Boaz says he has bought Ruth to be his wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So instead of being disobedient, he is obedient. He understands he can marry Ruth the Moabite, that she's already been brought into the family of the Lord. Then all the people who were at the gate of the elders said, and this is curious, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman. Okay, so everything has happened has been the guys doing the thing, and the blessing that the elders have is back toward Ruth, who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. Now, think back. When Rachel and Leah were having children, that circumstance was an ugly circumstance, right? Jacob was tricked by his uncle into marrying the ugly sister, and he discovered it that next morning and had to work for him 7 more years to marry the pretty sister that he liked. And the pretty sister couldn't have kids, right? So he starts having kids with the handmaids, and the whole thing is just ugly. But what comes out of that are the 12 tribes of Israel, including Judah, the one who's to hold the scepter, right, to be the lineage of the king. And that, may you act worthily in Ephrathah and renowned in Bethlehem. And so now they're going from the generation of Jacob to the generation of Judah. And the elders here are blessing this woman, reminding her that there were bad, ugly circumstances that the Lord used to bless the nation Israel. And it doesn't get much worse than Tamar, who bore Perez. You remember that in Genesis 28. Judah's oldest son marries Tamar, but he's a bad guy, so the Lord cuts him off. He kills him. And so the next oldest son marries Tamar, but he wants his own wife, not his brother's wife, to have his kids. So he doesn't have kids with Tamar either. And so the Lord has him, cuts him off from the land, kills him because of his action. And now the third son, Judah's like, well, this lady's like a black widow, like everybody that marries her dies. Or what's the praying mantis, right? He's like, I'm not going to let my youngest son marry her unless he dies too, right? And so Judah refuses to marry. He's like, yeah, I'm going to shut you up in a tower in my own house, and I promise when my youngest son is old enough, he'll marry you. And he never does it. So one day Tamar sneaks out to a neighboring city. She dresses up like a prostitute. Judah comes in, sees the prostitute, doesn't realize it's his own daughter-in-law, and has a child with her. 4 months later, they find out she's pregnant. The family members in Judah's house are like, look, she's pregnant. She's been immoral. He's like, go drag her outside and have her burned at the stake for being immoral. And as she's being drug out to be burned at the stake, she's like, oh, by the way, the parent of my child is the one whose signet ring and staff this, and it's Judah's. He's like, she's actually more righteous than I am. Super ugly circumstance. That kid was Rahab's ancestor, right? And so these elders are saying, look, this thing was a difficult circumstance. It was an ugly circumstance. People were not being obedient to the Lord, but you are, Ruth. And so may the Lord bless you, just like the outcome of Israel, just like the outcome of Judah. So that last kind of point is that when God purposes to use your life and we are faithfully obedient, he does reward our faithfulness. But what was the name of the guy who wasn't faithful, who didn't marry Ruth? Nobody but God knows, right? Whatever reward he would have gotten, it's not in Scripture, it's gone, right? Like he doesn't have anything. Matthew Henry writes this about this. He says, men are ready to seize opportunities for increasing their estates, but few know the value of godliness. Such are the wise men of this world, whom the Lord charges with folly. They attend not to the concern of their souls, but reject the salvation of Christ for fear of marring their inheritance. But God did Boaz the honor to bring him into the line of the Messiah, while the kinsman, who is afraid of lessening himself and marring his inheritance, has his name, family, and inheritance forgotten. And all of that was made possible because Ruth was willing to go back with Naomi to pursue after God and to follow the law of Israel in spite of what it was going to, potentially, how it was going to affect her marrying Boaz. And for all we know, they had a great marriage, we would count that. But better than that, more important than that, was the fact that they both honored God and the Lord rewarded them and made an inheritance out of that. So I didn't know if you wanted to add anything before you want to close us in prayer.
Well, just real briefly, we all recognize the importance of serving others and loving on other people through an opportunity such as service. And I can remember, and some of you, a lot of you may, if you've ever been on a missions trip or just a day of service, after doing that, how good that makes you feel, just sharing the love of God with others. And I would just encourage us to never forget that feeling, and through us faithfully obeying God, through serving Him, the reward that we can gain from that, it's not just feeling good on this earth, but it's reward that we'll receive in heaven as well. So just encouragement for that. So let's go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer. Dear God, I thank you for this time that we could look at the character of Ruth and just what she has taught us through her life, and that the circumstances that we go through and face that we may consider to be hard and tough, and we just don't know what to do. But God, you can use, it's not an obstacle for you in accomplishing your purposes. And I pray that we can all just faithfully obey you, just like Ruth did. And we know through doing that we'll receive the reward. But if we don't, then we know that we may end up one day just regretting that. And I pray that we can just obey you in all circumstances and just bring honor and glory to you each and every day. And I pray we can find opportunities this week to represent some practical steps of what we learned tonight in our life, and be careful to give you the praise and thanks for it. And I'll ask your name. Amen.